So we'll get started in just a minute. Just waiting for one more member. Oh, there we go. All right, good morning. This is the Tuesday, November 23rd, 2021 meeting of Municipal Assembly's Reapportionment Committee. Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here. Good morning.
And then for Assembly members not committee members, Ms. Allard? Mr. Dunbar? Ms. LaFrance? Mr. Perez-Verdia? Mr. Rivera? Mr. Weddleton? Ms. Salatel? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. The agenda before us, we have roll call introduction, new business, or discussion of the resolution declaring malapportionment, ongoing business, published timeline that we're going to discuss, communications plan brief, and any budget. And an update on the state final plan adoption will probably be limited at this point. Any additional items to add to the agenda today from members? All right, well, there's probably plenty to go there. Madam Clerk, would you please pull up the draft resolution declaring malapportionment?
Yep, just a second.
Thank you. Sorry about the barking dog.
Your neighbors must love you, Mr. Constant.
They're far enough away, but yeah, she's a sweet old lady who likes to bark. It's the roommate that doesn't probably love it. Okay, we have the item up before us. Members had drafts sent out to them last week after our meeting. And the question to the membership was, do you have any amendments you'd like to propose to this item before we do or do not make a recommendation to the body? So this question is on the floor. Are there any amendments anyone wishes to propose? Ms. Quinn Davidson,
May
go
I go
ahead.
ahead, Mr. Constant?
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Thank you. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be an amendment. I just wanted to have a short discussion with the committee about addressing the truncation of terms. I didn't know if that was something we should speak to now. I'm okay with it. I just didn't necessarily expect it in there. So I just wanted to hear from the drafters about why they included it and sort of what, if we're just giving the public a heads up and that's a good idea, or just some of those thoughts.
Can you point to the line you're referring to? And just for the record,
Yeah,
myself.
I think it's in the AM. Wasn't there an AM as well? I think it's in the other document toward the end.
Okay.
There we go. I think that big paragraph is it.
Right. And so the reason that is in there is there have been many conversations about the topic brought up by members of the public who have raised it as a concern, and Assembly Council worked hard to get that Kentop case before us. And we've had the discussion a number of times going back, I think, before the charter amendment had passed. So is the notion that we should take this out or have more of a conversation about it, or just noting that it's there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's fine to leave it if the committee's all comfortable with it. And obviously this has had legal review and our lawyers must agree with it as well. So I think I'm fine with it. I just wanted to raise that it might have the public asking questions, but if this is a determination we're all comfortable with at this stage, I think we should just leave it in.
All right. And I think the point that Dean made when he wrote this was that the issue can't really finally be addressed until the reapportionment plan is adopted and it's specifically known. But your point is well made. Any other
Well,
members?
and that's a good point.
Oh, go ahead.
That it's good to give the public a sense for what to expect. So
Yeah.
it's probably good that it's in there.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Constant.
You're welcome. Were there any
Yes,
other inputs or proposed amendments?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Kennedy, go ahead.
thanks. You know, I actually appreciated that there was such a good description of the potential truncation process that was in the AM. So I think what it does is it lets the public know that there's a lot that hasn't been decided yet. And I think there's some comfort in that. I know that will be confusing to some, but others, we are actually going through a more, just really a better process where we'll answer questions as we can. So I think in terms of the resolution, that gets right to the point of why we're doing all this. And then the AM answers some of the questions that are going to come up because of this. So for me, when I read both documents, I'm good with both. So thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Peterson, any thoughts?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think this is just sort of what we're looking for. I think this is good timing. Timing is good on this, and I think this is it's ready to move forward. I'm good to go with it.
Right. Is there any objection to making a recommendation from the committee as
No
drafted?
objection, no objection from me.
Okay. I'm not hearing any objections. So tonight, when the item comes up, there will be if it's pulled from the consent agenda, a conversation in which the committee recommends adoption of this resolution. Okay, then there's the next item that I have on the agenda, which is a draft published timeline. It should just say draft timeline. It's not published yet. Can you bring up the AIM, Ms. Honest? The draft AIM, I should say. So other than the error that's in the title there, the misspelling of Anchorage, we're going to have a brief discussion today about the tentative timeline. This timeline was worked out with the contractor, Dennis Wheeler, and myself, and assembly staff talking about the various milestones in the process. And this again is draft. I would like us, if possible, to work our way through the calendar right now so that we can submit this as an IM that can go with the resolution that can set out a timeline so the public can have a basic, more detailed understanding of the intent of how we're going to move through this process. So it reads, the Reapportionment Committee is pleased to report that it has adopted a working timeline and communications plan for establishing a new assembly district boundaries, as well as a reapportionment fact sheet for public education. We recognize some dates may be subject to change depending on the will of the assembly. And it probably also should read the will of the committee and the assembly. So we have also a fact sheet that we briefed before, but we have a final draft version that's still marked draft to share and a conversation to have about the communications plan as well further down the agenda. But I think the key piece of this is the timeline, as you see today. Go ahead, Ms. Alex, in the queue.
I apologize. I was going to wait till you were done, Mr. Chair. I guess my question, looking at the timeline, is there a final time when the 12th member would be up for election? Would it be like the following 2023, or is it going to be like a special? I apologize. I was kind of waiting until you got done. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So I think that that's a matter that isn't really up for contemplation for today. I think that will be a question that resolves as we get further toward the process of introducing a plan and what the effective dates of the plan are decided by the body and all of those items. It is a fair question, and the answer is one that the attorneys are probably going to have to give us. And Dean isn't available today. So that is a topic that's well on the minds of folks, and I don't have a great answer for you. Ms. Kennedy.
Well, I'm looking kind of at the terminology here, the initial draft plan. Aren't we going to have multiple potential plans?
Yeah, absolutely.
So-
And in fact, that would have been one of the changes I would make is I would
Okay,
put an
Okay.
S after the word plan everywhere you see it, except
Yeah.
for the final one.
and
Yes,
so
that's fair.
I would get rid of that word initial, because there's going to be obviously several, and then add the S on the end of plans. So anyway, so actually then that December 9th meeting, we don't really know for sure if we'll be able to have something to really kick this off with yet at that point.
So why don't I walk through the timeline first, and then
Okay.
we'll come back to that question, because I think that's a really good question, and it might answer itself in the process. Same, Ms. Quinn Davidson. I'll just briefly walk through the timeline. So the committee works through the timeline and communications review and kind of recommendation for the declaration. Tonight, the declaration moves and assume it passes. Then one of the conversations we can have today is, of course, time dependent, is some initial inputs to the contractor who's here for some initial approach to drawing maps and thoughts of what people want to have on the table. Then they're going to come back with an initial set of plans on the 9th, which will give us then basically the next month to consume and think about and share with members of the public the plan that we have in our own circles and community councils, even though it's the holidays, so we'll miss much of the community councils there. We will, on January 6th, reconvene the committee to review the plans again and prepare for the town hall. One thing that's not on the calendar here that was kind of thought through after the fact when we finished the process yesterday was what's the deadline for interested third parties and members of the public to submit draft maps of their own. And I think we're going to add January 10th there, which once we receive them, if they're deemed valid in the context of the rules that are established, like contiguous, has the right deviations, etc., then those would get published and printed up by our reprographics department. So those maps, as well as the maps of our own initial process, will be available for people to review on the 12th. Then on the 13th, the committee would meet again to review feedback from the town hall and up the process up till then, and give instructions to the contractor over the course of the next week. They would continue drafting maps or a map, which we would reconvene again on the 20th of January to finalize a proposal to set forward into a draft ordinance, which would be introduced by the regular deadline on January 21st for the February 1st meeting. We would then schedule a work session for the 11th of February to have a full working conversation. Then on the 15th, we would open a public hearing. We would then close the public hearing and open another public hearing, a second public hearing on March the 1st to make sure that the public has ample opportunity, much like the budget. At which point then we would deliberate and adopt the plan. So now that brings back your question, Ms. Kennedy. Maybe restate it.
Well, it was kind of two parts, just the idea that we would change that word from plan to plans.
Yeah, that's done. Considered done.
And if December 9th is reasonable at this point, from what we know from, what's the company name? Sorry.
RDI.
RDI, thank you. In what they feel like, where they're at this point too. So, and maybe it's more like as available might be the better term. But anyway, so the fact that we basically make sure that people understand there's going to be multiple draft plans, and So anyway, yeah, that's the question right now is, are we really going to be ready for a December 9th meeting of some, to be able to review those initial plans?
Yeah, and I guess maybe review isn't quite the right word. It would probably be present or hand over, share with the committee a series of initial maps. Because once we'll receive them on the 9th, not really review them. We'll have an initial review, but so I think maybe there's just a small semantic issue there, but we can work on that a little bit. So
Okay,
great.
yeah, but I do have another question or another thought.
Go ahead.
I'm concerned that we would only have one town hall meeting.
Mhm.
Particularly, I don't know what night of the week January 12th is, but typically if people always have something they do on Tuesday night or Thursday night or whatever, it would be nice to have a second option. So I think we should consider doing that, a second town hall. Just to
So
make sure.
for sure, that's a discussion we initially had, and we settled on one, not ruling out an additional one. We didn't know whether we should think about doing them geographically, who would lead, etc. So we definitely put one in there. And then the January 12th, there is an assembly meeting on the 11th. And there's the Monday before that, which is the 10th, and there's the Thursday after that, which could also work. So that would be the 10th and 12th, or the 12th and 13th.
Well, I would be up for either of those combinations. Because like I said, I don't remember that we decided there should only be one, but
No,
anyway.
we didn't. No, we didn't. It was just the working group when we put this together. We kind of chewed through it and decided the committee needed to have some input there.
Okay, got it. All right. Well, yeah, like I said, I would definitely support a second one, just so we know we give the public options. Because I think this is going to garner a lot of interest, and the more time people have to look over things, that's when they'll start mulling through it, and then maybe they'll be ready to actually start sending in comments, and certainly be prepared for setting up or for coming in and talking during the first public hearing.
Is that generally agreed by folks to do two town halls? Or is there any objection? I guess is a better way to put it.
That would work for me, Mr. Chair and Ms. Kennedy. I think that's a good idea. I'm not available on the 10th, but I don't know that all members need to be at both, but it's probably preferable that they are. So we could do it the 13th. The only thing is our meeting is scheduled the morning of the 13th, so then we'd probably have to move that, to Friday or something, but.
Right.
Yeah, and my other question was about if, I'm just sort of absorbing all this, but if members of the public wanted to submit maps. I remember we had a discussion about that sort of early in this process, and I think you answered that question, which is we would add a January 10th deadline, did you say?
Yes.
Okay, and then we would have that and the town hall and be able to discuss it all at our next meeting.
Right. So the idea is we need to set out a mark on the calendar where people who are interested in submitting maps know when they need to have them by, and the idea is have them before the town halls so that we can publish them if they meet all the boundaries. So yes.
Got it. Thank you.
And so Ms. Quinn Davidson, you were in the queue.
Oh, just for that, but
okay.
Thank you.
All right, other members, any questions?
Just a
No, I think
general
it's good to
question.
go, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Kennedy.
I guess I'm a little concerned about the timeline of getting everything adopted, that March 1st, second public hearing and deliberation and adoption, because we don't really have to have it by that point. We could even extend it out another couple weeks if we wanted
Absolutely.
to. And the only thing I don't want to see happen, and it will, but people are going to go, oh, they're trying to push this through for the election. And
yeah, so no,
so
that
we're
won't
really
actually, Ms. Kennedy, there's no way that this map will be in effect for the 2022 election. It is mathematically impossible. Yeah.
That's correct. You know that, and I know that, but the public is going to read it however they feel like reading it. And that's what I'm saying is I'd much rather make sure there's plenty of time in there. And actually, if we're having the town halls in January, I mean, you have to really tell people at that point that there's no way this is going to have any effect on the current election season. But anyway, I guess I'm just saying, I would just want to make sure that we keep kind of reiterating that, I guess.
Yeah.
And then that we don't get so tied to a schedule that we can't be flexible enough to move things out if we need to.
Yeah.
Particularly because, like I said, the more we push an actual schedule like this, then the more people get suspicious about things that we're not doing good public process. But anyway,
And
you
I
know
just
how it
want
is,
to
that's how people
point
think.
to lines 9, 10, and 11 there. We recognize that some dates may be subject to change depending on the will of the assembly, and the committee will be added there. And so your point is well made. And the theory of this is just a timeline that the members of the public can have to set a benchmark from, and it's subject to change as we go along, depending on what evolves from the process. So we can definitely say that, and maybe Claire, we can add some statement to that in the communications plan so that people understand that the timelines are really dependent on the process, not the process dependent on the timelines.
Okay, yeah, I can include that.
Mr.
The other
Peter,
thing,
go ahead, Ms. Kennedy. Yep.
sorry, I'm really not using the queue much, but because I never know what my Teams thing is going to actually work with this.
Small committee, it's fine.
No, thanks. So in the dates of having the last town hall meeting on the 13th and then meeting to finalize the plans on the 20th in order to get it to meet the deadline on the 21st, I'm even wondering if one meeting is going to be enough for us to finalize the plan, unless we have several hours of that meeting. So that's possible. So I'm just saying, I think we're going to have more discussion amongst ourselves than an hour's meeting would be able to accommodate. So I'm a little concerned about those 2 dates, the January 20th and then the January 21st, being so close. So that's just a thought, concern right there, about whether or not we can really make that happen.
Yeah, and I think we get into a pretty robust timeline from the 12th forward, where it's going to be regular meeting and almost weekly and more tackling this issue. And so if we find we need more time, that would be the time when we address extension of the calendar. This is simply the framework that gets us to a pretty robust process, but allows flexibility to address those concerns. Again, none of this is set in stone. I think that how I would frame it again is what I said, that the timeline is dependent on the process, not the process dependent on the timeline. So, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was thinking that when we're doing the communications, that maybe we could include the clerk's timeline for the election so that people can see what the lead time is on these elections. And because they probably don't realize that that the information has to be there for the clerk by January, January 9th or something. Yeah. And the election's not till April, so the average person on the street probably doesn't realize that there's that much lead time needed. And so maybe if we when we're putting out our communications, if we could list some of those dates, maybe that'd be easier for people to understand why we're not having that 12th assembly member on the ballot this year. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Allard is in the queue again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of my questions is, and maybe I misunderstood, is this going to be introduced to us tonight on the assembly?
Only the malapportionment and the draft schedule.
Okay, wonderful. And then my other question is, maybe it's not a question, maybe it's more of a comment. So a lot of these elections are costing, the community a lot of money. And I guess my only recommendation would probably be if the rest of the assembly members may be open to waiting for the 2023 election in order to have a new member, the 12th member, elected.
So there are discussions along those lines, and again, the attorneys will weigh in on that when the process gets closer to that part of the debate.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know what the answer is, so it's one of those open questions. Okay, so let me restate the changes that I have, Claire, make sure that I capture all these. We're going to add the letter S and remove the word initial, wherever the word plans are except the final version at the bottom, so that the public understands several plans may come forward. We are going to change the timeline by adding a new town hall on the 13th and shifting the committee meeting to the 14th. And I think that that's everything for the timeline. Did I miss anything?
Did you say, Mr. Constant, adding the January 10th deadline for any public maps?
I didn't say that. Thank you. And so we're going to add a bullet for January 10th, which is deadline for submission of third-party maps. Did you get all those, Claire?
Yes, I got them, and I can send a new draft to Mandy so she can share if people want to review it before it gets submitted tonight.
Yeah, so that would be great to have it moving to the next step of the process. We'll review it once before. This item will be laid on the table as a supplemental item to 2021-382. If there's nothing further on this topic, then we'll pivot to the communications plan.
Can I just ask one quick question, Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Did you know, I just noticed that Mr. Presverdia and Mr. Weddleton are both on as well. They must have joined. So how will the maps be created? If there are multiple options, is this just something that RDI works on and says, you know, here's 3 possibilities that we see, and they bring it to us and then we discuss? Or what is our responsibility in terms of helping get those prepared or being part of that process?
Excellent question. And towards the end of this agenda, I was hoping we could have a discussion about the kind of advice or kind of direction guidance to the contractor on tactics and approach.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't really know how to answer that question. I think it's a very philosophical question at this time that we should be discussing. So if you don't mind, I'm going to add that to the bottom of the agenda.
Sure.
If nobody minds, I should say. So go ahead, Claire.
Okay, hi everyone. I created this draft plan, just a really short overview. So hopefully you've had a chance to review it. And this is all open for feedback, and some of it will definitely need input from committee members. But I figured that the main points we needed to educate people on were just 101 of reapportionment, how it works and why it's important. It's a confusing process, and with the state process going on too, I think we'll need a lot of education on that. And then sharing ways for the community to get involved, and then spreading the word as much as possible early on so that we get participation in the public hearings, and there's reduction of conflict and surprise at the end when you're passing the plan. And then as came up today, I think explaining the timing of all of this, that Assemblymember Peterson's suggestion to include some of the filing deadlines to show that it can't be done in time for this election. So I'll add that. We've finalized the timeline for now. Of course, it's all a work in progress. And then Mandy, can you go to the next page? So then I just have a list of items, ideas that I have for PR. We'll go over the fact sheet next, make sure that the committee approves that, and then we can get that posted and spread throughout the community. I think we could do we talked about doing an op-ed piece, but maybe we want to save that for later on when there's more meat to discuss, and then just do a press release announcing the process has started and give links to all the information we've created today. I'll be doing press releases throughout the process to make sure people in the community know about the key steps and how they can get involved. One thing I'll work on really soon is creating talking points. It's going to be too much for Chris or me or any one person to do all of this work. So our idea is to have each assembly member, as you're going out to your community council meetings and Rotary meetings and the places that you normally go, to be armed with information that you can share. So we'll have talking points and handouts that you can take to your meetings. And I'd love it if you could individually let me know which meetings you're going to, so I can create kind of a speaker tour schedule and keep track of who's been presented to. So if we find areas of town or specific communities that we have underserved, we can make sure to reach out to them towards the end. I'm going to sign Assembly Member Constant up for a Make It Monday in January. There's a few slots open last time I checked. I think that'll be a really great place to make a big splash and make sure the community knows about the town halls. And then some other ideas. So I would love it if the committee could give me any of your ideas for places you like to speak or announce to. And then I have a very small initial list of who we need to outreach to. We're still working on the details with RDI. They are going to be putting up a website for this process, and I think we should maybe do an email list of people who are interested in this, so I can start collecting those names and we'll feed them into whatever system we have. So if you have email addresses of nonprofits who follow elections and civic issues, please send them my way and I'll get an email list started that we can send our announcements out to. I have the community councils, all of your personal communications you do via social media and email. I'm sure the League of Women Voters will want to be involved. We happen to know the Alaska Black Caucus is having a community conversation at the end of this month, so we pitched to them to do reapportionment, so they're going to do that. So please send me your ideas. I don't know if we have time, probably don't have time to discuss today, but you could email me, or if we do have time, we could have a small discussion of what other groups should be included. And then with that, I have a handful of questions I wanted to run by the committee before I finalize this plan. So Assembly Member Constant, would this be a good time to ask these questions?
Yes, fine. We have about 28 minutes of the committee left, so.
Okay. So the first one, what are the main messages you want to share with our communications? If there's anything I missed in that first section.
Members of the committee? Any thoughts? I guess it's kind of hard to absorb all this info all at once, but if you have any, go ahead.
What your question was, what do you want to do in the first? Can you say your question again?
Oh yeah, what are the main messages we should be sharing with the public about this process? Just to review, I had general one-on-one on how reapportionment works, ways for the communities to get involved, and spreading the word as far as we can to make sure people get involved early and aren't surprised at the end. Is there anything else I should be focusing on?
Well, great to
So I see Mr. Weddleton in the queue. Ms. Quinn Davidson, if you want to add anything, go ahead first.
Nope.
Okay, John.
Things that I've been hearing is, how does this compare with the state? And I think you brought that up, but people are, do you have to match state districts and so on? And there's some, I think, assumption that we do. So that would be something to address.
Okay.
Anything else, John?
No, thanks.
All right, Crystal.
Thank you. I think kind of like what Pete was saying earlier, we have to reiterate the fact that this will not affect the spring election. So I'm just real, I know people, well, yeah, just that. Let's make sure that we really reiterate that this isn't going to have anything to do with the spring election. And, you know, and maybe if the fact that it may not have anything to do with a special election either, that those questions all get answered after we do the redistricting. So that everybody understands it really is a step-by-step process, and questions get answered kind of after we do certain parts. But again, I just don't want people thinking that they've got them. We're going to have on the election on the ballot in April, you know, the 12th member being elected or any kind of truncating going on. So
Okay.
thanks. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent. Ms. Quinn Davidson put in the chat that she agrees with Ms. Kennedy. You know, one thing we might want to make sure we do, since we're speaking to the Anchorage Chamber, is to set up process with the Eagle River Chugiak Chamber of Commerce, as well as something in Girdwood that does the same thing.
Thank you. Yes, I was thinking about them myself anyway, so I'd be happy to, you know,
Take the lead.
help with that. So
Yep, that'd be great. And ideally, you know, this isn't me doing a show. This is all of us doing outreach on the process to the people that we know. And so that's the operating theory, that we'll get as much as we can on the calendar, but each of us has the opportunity and maybe even the responsibility to share. So if there's nothing else, oh, go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
I was also thinking about just the website, particularly
Yeah, so I'll speak
yeah.
to that briefly.
Okay.
Dennis Wheeler with RDI and their team is committed to getting up a website here pretty soon. And currently the portal for communications for the committee is the committee website. But once that website is up, essentially that's going to be the locus of the information and postings and whatnot. So it's a very important issue and it's in development.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You know, and one thing that Claire and I were talking about yesterday was figuring out a way to archive all of this for the next 10-year process when we're all hopefully off doing other more fun and interesting things. And so keep in mind as we're going forward that which we should be carrying and pushing to the future. So I know we're still early in the process, but when you start a new job, they say you should always be training your replacement. And so let's keep an eye on that future as well.
So with that, I just have one more request of committee members, and I'll send an email out to remind you, but just let me know groups you want to outreach to, emails you want to add to our contact list, and any other PR ideas you want me to add to the list, and I'll just keep building out this plan as we move forward. I'll at least have a draft that we can include with the AAM tonight.
May I ask Claire,
Yep.
may I ask Claire a question, Mr. Constant?
Yep,
Claire, do you have the presidents of all the community councils on your outreach list? Because I think that would make good sense.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think I inherited the list from the clerk's office, so I had some of them, but I will make sure that I have all of them. That's a good idea.
Okay, great, thanks.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
I see Mr. Peterson first and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think if you just send it to the FCC, they'll forward to all the community councils. And that's the best way to move forward with that. Thanks.
Okay, I'll check with FCC and confirm that's happening.
It does happen when you do that. However, I think a personal approach also is good, where each of the presidents, maybe not one at a time, but in a mass email to the presidents only, is another method that we should probably use as well. Only because I get lots of communications from FCC and they go into one of my inboxes and I don't necessarily see them regularly, but if it comes directly, I'll see it. And so a little personal approach wouldn't hurt, but both. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. Sorry to, I guess, back up a bit here, but on this AIM, is that to be laid on the table this evening?
Yes.
Okay, you know, something to address the issue of when this goes into effect. If a date kind of at the end of this, you have March 1st, add whatever the date of the election is in 2023 and put that date, April X 2023 election, including the 12th district or something like that. But that would pretty much solidify.
I don't want to speak to the 12th member until we have really solid legal analysis, but I think that's a fair amendment to the general approach of the election for those seats.
Okay.
You could put something sort of to Crystal and Pete's point, I think, about not confusing things, and to John's point, you could put something like, following the election of 2022, something that just saying that it will take place after that.
Well, Austin, I think John was fair in saying that the election of 2023 is the time when the new map should be in effect, or the next election. I just want to make sure that we don't walk on the question of when the 12th seat will be filled, because that's dependent on a number of variables, and we should have that conversation separately from when the broader map is in effect.
Yeah, that's fair. I was trying to think of a way, if we don't have that legal analysis, to make it clear that it wouldn't be in April 2022. That's it. But I don't know exactly how to word it, but
I guess I could write on that schedule, April 2023, the election that this will go into place, and then I could write another line, TBD, election of the 12th member.
Or just add the intended date for the next election would be, or the election on which these maps would be in effect would be April 2023, just intended. And that way, when we get through the process, we can make the changes as needed. Once we have,
I haven't had discussions with the lawyers, or obviously Chris knows more than I do about this, but do we know there will be either a special election or regular election? I don't know. I wouldn't want to say either, because once you say something, then people expect it. Maybe it is 2020. I have no idea, but I'm just nervous about promising anything.
So what if we just say,
yeah, go ahead.
Maps to take effect after 2022 election?
That seems good to me. Map and election for the 12th seat to take place after that, or something like that.
Thank you for that suggestion, John. So anyone else on the communications plan draft? Okay, Claire, there was the fact sheet. Did we want to walk through that again?
Yeah, I think that would be great to have committee eyes on that one more time. Mandy, could you pull that up? This new version has been vetted by Mr. Gates as well, and Ms. Jones. Some changes since you last saw it. I think we added a little more detail into the why is reapportionment needed section to explain the 12th seat. I made some changes from formatting changes based on your feedback to the flow chart, added dates. For the subsequent elections, we'll use the new maps and districts. I wrote May 2022 forward. And then I think on the second page, I added more detail about the Voting Rights Act. And those are the main changes.
So any input from members of the committee?
It looked good to me.
I think it looks great.
Okay, Ms. Kennedy.
Yeah, I'm still kind of looking over a few things, but I looked at it earlier, and I think that's good. I mean, it'll be a good public document, so sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you. So there's, Claire, it looks like we're all good. There's one conversation that we haven't had, or that we had before, that we never quite figured out how to do it. And that's the public mapping process. How members of the public can have access to tools to make their own maps. And we had said previously that we would like to provide that opportunity, and we had some public testimony requesting it. And the cost of that tool is, if we do it through our system, $100,000 or more, which is just, to me, very prohibitive. And so I've been having conversations with folks, and there are, in fact, 3 tools out there that members of the public can use. And I'm actually going to send this to Claire and Mandy right now, and maybe they can post these links up so that it can be part of the record. I am going to recommend, and we can have a discussion now on whether we should spend $100,000 to do this or drive people to the free public map making assets and resources that are out there. So stand by. This information should briefly be in the hands of our team. So I just sent it both to Mandy and Claire. When they receive it, maybe one of them can share the information. I see Mr. Presverdia is in the queue while we wait. Welcome, Mr. Presverdia.
Thank you. Just a question. Do you know, does someone on the call know the sort of the public input using a system like this from the state? Like, what were there a lot of people that took the time to go on to the system and use it? I'm curious about that, because I'm just wondering whether it's something that we would see a lot of input in, or whether it would not. So I just wondered if there was any information about when the state offered that as an option, whether there was a significant amount of usage or not. Thanks.
So I don't know the answer to that question, but I just forwarded that question to someone who will know. So while we have a discussion about these tools, hopefully by the time we're done discussing them, we'll have some input from members of that group.
Yeah, I would just hate to spend all of that money and it not be used. So
yeah, and especially when you think about the fact that we're talking about 2 months, $100,000 for a tool that is apparently readily available for free, if people want to teach themselves how to use it and do it. And so what I have before you, there's a really great link from ballotpedia.org about current redistricting apps and software that are available for the 2022 cycle. If you click the link, you'll see basically there are several tools, some that are only available for government, some that are available for government and public use, which ones you have to pay for and which ones are free. These 3 that I've listed down below, District Builder, Dave's Redistricting, and Districtor, are 3 free tools that are available to the public that have all the data included from the census process and allow members of the public to draw maps of their own. And so I think I'm moving, because of the cost factor, to propose that we allow or even promote one or more of these tools, and maybe even find an expert that can help provide a public training on how to use them. Spending that money, maybe a couple $1,000s for training, to me would be much smarter money than spending $100,000 and providing a tool that's available for free. Any inputs on this? And we don't have to make a decision today. This is just a beginning of a conversation.
Well, that sounds reasonable to me. Can you send us those links?
Absolutely. I'll
Yeah.
ask Claire to send that out to everybody shortly.
Thanks.
And there are other tools, but these are the ones that this Ballotpedia, which is a nonprofit group that does election work, nonpartisan election group, recommended. And there are a bunch more on the list. So yeah, please, Claire, when you get a moment. I think this solves the issue without us spending a bunch of money that has relatively limited value. Mr. Wheeler, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not familiar with these 3 specific applications, but what I would note is that it may be that these particular tools don't vet the mapping the same way the other proposed tool does in terms of making sure it meets all of the required legal standards. Depending on how these work, it may be that there would be some work behind the scenes required by us, or however you want to do this, to make sure they do meet the legal requirements. So it's not, so these may be a little harder or take a little bit more time to translate. Just keeping that in mind.
Right, and I understand that, and I totally foresee that that is the truth of it. And I think our spend with you would, even though you're a very well-paid professional firm that I respect, is probably going to be less expensive than $100,000 for a tool that few people use. So yes, there may be work, and I think we'll have to be careful when we put the language out about receiving maps that they have to be maps that meet the standards. You know, we're not going to spend time on every map that we receive if they are kind of absurd, if you will, and they don't meet the legal standards. But we'll have to figure out a process by which we get to understanding that. So that, I think, gets to your point. I recognize the limitations. So I haven't yet heard. I will make sure when I hear back from the folks that dealt with the state redistricting, how the utilization went. I'll get that report for folks. Any other thoughts on this topic before we pivot over? We have about 10 minutes left. So for the last 5 minutes before we open up for public testimony, I want us to have a conversation about kind of input and feedback to Mr. Wheeler and their team on philosophical approaches to the initial drafts. Dennis, do you want to add anything to start that conversation?
Well, I think there's some general guidance that we would presume to already be in effect, but the committee can clarify or add or embellish on the general topics. And those would be things like try to avoid splitting condensed neighborhoods, try to avoid lines that don't follow parcel boundaries. We want to make sure we don't split parcels like we've seen with the US census blocks. Try to maintain that obvious legal standard of being compact, contiguous, et cetera. And of course, paying attention to Voting Act requirements in terms of minority representation. So those are sort of givens. Outside of that, you know, obviously we need to expand District 1. So committee members may have opinions on things to look for in that expansion. And that's why we may end up with a variety of maps to encapsulate different individual members' ideas on how they want to approach it. Thank you.
So Dennis, I don't want to put you in the firing line, but I think it would be maybe smart to allow folks to reach out to you if they have thoughts. Members, not broadly the public, but members could reach out to you for inputs. Is that reasonable to you?
Yeah, I think getting individual ideas that way is fine. Obviously, we want to avoid any sort of serial meeting issues, but I can certainly take individual input either through the committee meetings or offline as is convenient, because I know we have a tight time schedule, so it's not always convenient to throw together a meeting every time somebody has an idea.
Dennis, I think we avoid serial meeting issues if they're independently talking to you and we're not, you know, broadly coordinating on them before those inputs are consolidated into some thoughtful approach. Does anyone disagree with that theory? Yeah, I think it's a good concept to allow you to. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Oh, I was just going to say I agree with you. I think giving individual feedback, if we have it to Dennis, makes sense.
Yeah, in some ways, then you become a broker, Dennis, in an odd sort of way. But as long as it's limited in time, doesn't become overburdensome. If you find it becomes too much, then we can redirect it back to the committee. Okay, I don't hear any objection to that. So speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, that gets us to the point where we have an initial approach. Members can give their concerns to Dennis. Dennis, how would you like to be contacted?
Email is probably the best way. That way it's easy for me to catalog the requests.
Yep.
The main thing I would mention there is please be careful to use my resource data email address. I have 3 or 4 different addresses out there, including an Anchorage, Uni, and Wheeler Law Office, et cetera, et cetera. So please use the resource data email.
Would you go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll make sure that gets communicated out to members.
Sure.
So I will now just point out that this is the first meeting in which we've used all of our allotted time. And this is foreshadowing for what the next 2 months is going to look like. With that, I'm going to open the floor to audience participation. Any members of the public wish to be heard at this time? If you are on the phone, you would hit *6 to unmute yourself. Anyone at all? All right, any last comments from members of the committee or members of the assembly? I guess I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. The wheels are now turning. And there will be a recommendation tonight for adoption of the declaration of malapportionment should it be pulled from the consent agenda. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Good job, Chris.
Sounds good.